Hey now, and how are you doing? Want to welcome you to the next episode of Peace, Love, and Bring a Bat. Today we're bringing in some big guns, man. I can't wait to talk to my friend Nancy. Her background is incredible, but it's a one of resilience. People, not only leadership, but resilience and so much more. How are you doing today, Nancy?
I'm great. Good to be here, Dave.
Okay, well, thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate it. I saw your story, and want you to tell. Why don't you share your part of your story of what got you here?
Well, I used to be a very hard driving CEO who measured everything based on how many goals I could surpass, how high I could jump, how far I could run, and who I could outlast. And I lived that life in Silicon Valley for a very long time until my business started to run out of cash. And anybody out there trying to run a startup business knows that 9 out of 10 fail. And mine was one of the ones that just about imploded against the wall, and I sold it to a competitor. That palpable failure made me determined that I was going to do something to prove that I could still succeed. So I set out to climb Mount Kilimanjaro. And I'll let the story unfold naturally, but that was the beginning of a journey that I never expected.
Okay, well, let's start off with the leadership part, right? So, being a CEO in Silicon Valley, and for anybody who doesn't know, I don't know how you don't know, but Silicon Valley is exactly why they call it Silicon Valley. All the tech companies and all the innovative companies that are out there. And so, what company did you specifically? What was your company's specialty?
The name of my company was Purple Moon, and we set out to help young women, girls actually, get their hands on technology so they could grow up and be competitive with boys who were playing video games at the time. So we were in the midst of a grand wave of the internet coming into being without necessarily having a business model along with it. And we started a software, internet, collectibles, and book business to serve adolescent girls.
Yeah, which is, I'm a father of two girls, so
Ah,
so I understand that, and it's more, you know, the opportunities that they don't have because we don't think about it, right? So well, it's changed now, but still, growing up, there were not enough opportunities, right? It was, the boys have to do something, and what do you do? So, what made that passionate about it for you?
I think I've always been an advocate for girls and women, and I happened to be in software and the internet at the time. And the opportunity to meld those two things together and create something that girls would really love that would attach them to computers and make them grow up to be technologically competitive was something that was really exciting to me. And a woman that I met who was my co-founder had been doing research on girls and boys and how they played and how they used computer, and it seemed like a magic formula to try to bring something to market that was really especially designed for girls.
Yeah, and I can imagine, and being successful. So that brings you a whole bunch of different leadership opportunities. So, how do you know how to build the team? Building a team, was it all women? Was it, having all the feedback in? Uh,
Well, we were 94% women. We had a number of really dedicated dads out there who were part of the team.
we're out there.
Absolutely. And I really sought out to hire the smartest people that I could find in every capacity, knowing that the composite of all that talent would be so much greater than anything I could ever do on my own. I tried to lead by example, but I'm not sure that my example was a healthy one because I was the one who would work longer than everybody else and set very high standards for myself.
Well, that was exactly where I was going to lead. Is it a lot of times burnout, right? Because especially years ago, and then still today, right? You have to just keep working harder, and no matter what you're doing, you have to work harder and focus so much more. What about that shifted for you to realize that it's what you do, not how you do it?
While I was running my company, I thought that being resilient was all about bouncing back, overcoming every challenge, jumping over every hurdle, and pushing as hard as I possibly could. And I had to learn the hard way, and I know we'll talk about it, that resilience really wasn't going to be about that for me.
Right. Yeah. Sometimes we're being guided into a different direction, and your guide, uh, I guess, took you to Mount Kilimanjaro, which the sights of Mount Kilimanjaro. What made you decide to go climb the mountain,
Well,
climb another mountain? Yeah. Sorry.
after I sold the business, I sold it to an arch rival, by the way, which I considered to be a failure, even though others would consider it not to be. But it was the last company that I wanted to sell my business to. So I thought I have just got to prove that I can succeed at something. And I was an athlete, I was a runner. I was very active in high altitude climbing, and I thought, I'm going to go and I'm going to climb the tallest mountain in Africa, and that's going to prove that I can achieve, that I can succeed at something meaningful. So that's what I set out to do. Honestly, I had no business going up that mountain. It's not that it's technical, because it's not. As long as you train hard, you can ascend the mountain without crampons, without ice axes or anything like that. You're not roped up, you're just ascending very steeply up the mountain. About 2 weeks before the beginning of the ascent, I injured my back training, but the only mode that I knew was pushing ahead. I also had learned how to compartmentalize pain, so I shoved it down and thought, I'm doing this anyway. I mean, I set out to do this, I committed to do this, I need this win, so I'm going to climb the mountain. But by the first day, I had to relinquish my pack because I couldn't stand the weight on my spine. The second day, I was having trouble sitting and had to lie down right after dinner. The third and fourth day, the team fashioned a back brace out of duct tape wrapped around me in an inflatable pillow. And by the sixth day, I knew I was really in trouble. I couldn't sit at all. And if I wasn't hiking, I was lying down. So I realized that I had to descend.
Yeah, well, I guess that's a great metaphor. Well, maybe not so great for you. That pushing through doesn't always get us to where we want to go, because that pushing through actually probably caused a lot more damage than you would have preferred.
Well, that could not be more true. And, at 16,000 feet, I collapsed. And there I was in this tiny tent that a porter had carried me to by myself, 41 years old. And I couldn't move my legs. And I thought
Ooh.
something's deeply wrong with my body. And when I tried to shift my weight, it felt like somebody was just driving a steel rod through my spine. And the two things I thought, to your point, were number one, as a doctor's daughter, I started to diagnose myself and I thought, I'm probably dying. I'm going to end up a name on a plaque like other climbers who haven't made it down. And number two, the whole strategy I've oriented my life around pushing through is not working. And something's got to change because this is going to cause me harm. You would think I would have learned the lesson there on the mountain at 16,000 feet, but it took me 15 years to figure out what resilience actually meant.
Yeah, well, a lot of times the message has to be given to us multiple times. I've been there and I'm still learning at 57. So every time I think, man, I got this. God brings me so much different things. But was so with the company, so right, the reason why you needed to succeed is because of other people, or the way that you were thinking.
Well, I considered myself a failure at that point when I sold the company, and I just had something to prove to myself. It rips away your sense of identity. It rips away your sense of self-worth when you fail. It just dismantles everything, the story that you've always told yourself about who you were.
Right. And anytime that happens, it starts shifting things in so many different ways. How do you deal with that? Explain to us, you know, because obviously you then weren't successful with the Kilimanjaro. I still, the resilience shows so much more. Your story becomes so much more by learning what the mountain and the challenges the mountain brings us.
Well, what unfolded was a 15-year struggle with chronic pain that was actually so severe that the only way I could survive was to lie down all the time. So I was barely able to sit, occasionally for a meal, but I lay in a bed with a pile of opioids on a side table, really grieving the person that I used to be, and still, though, trying to fight to get back that person that I was. And over time, you start to feel like your life might be over. It's the most distress I think I've ever been in. As doctors said, we've done everything that we can do for you. We'll help you manage the pain, but the pain itself had become the disease, and my
Sure.
nervous system was switched to on, and everything hurt. So not just the part of my spine that had been ultimately repaired by surgery, but everything was sensitized. And I think not only the pain, but the fear of the pain created a vicious cycle that only got worse.
Right. That's the worst thing about the pain is that when it doesn't go away, if you get a pain and it starts to go away, you become different. But you get that mindset differently when you're having that chronic pain. And I, luckily, I have not experienced that, but I've spoken to enough people around who have, and that's some of that downward spiral. So while you're in that spiral between the company, the Kilimanjaro, how did you eventually pull yourself up? Right? It's not, and it's not a it's what was that first step, or I talk about when the window opened, in recovery. When I talk about it, it's if you're not open for anything, you're not going to get any wind, you're not going to get any fresh air. But when that crack opens, what's that first step that you were able to start to think about recovery?
For me, I had to hit the ultimate rock bottom before I opened up. And if I can just tell you the quickest story about what that felt like, I
Sure.
had gone about 6 years into my chronic pain lying down with opioids journey.
Mm,
I went to the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, and I went to there for a pain rehabilitation and drug detox program.
mm,
It's a 3-week program. The first week, they pull the drugs out, which is torturous in and of itself, as I'm sure you understand, and many in your community can imagine. It is physical, physiological, neurological, and emotional, and withdrawal is very real. The second and third week, they force back physical function so that I went from lying on the floor of the conference room to forcing myself to sit and walk and do some activities of daily living. No sooner did I leave that program than I landed in the hospital, sadly on higher dosage of opioids than ever before because I could not handle the push. And it's
mm,
curious to me now looking back that the Mayo Clinic at the time, I'm not familiar with their program today, but they pushed their clients, their participants, their patients very hard within a short window, and my body just couldn't handle it. And my doctor walked into the hospital room where I lay there, unable to walk. I had lost that ability with a bedside commode next to me. And he said, your tests show that you are there is nothing pathological going on underneath your pain, and we're going to need to send you home. And I
mm,
just thought to myself, A, it's up to me now. The medical system has done their very, very best, but this is what I need to deal with. And pushing harder is actually causing more of a problem than it is helping me. And I've got to find a different way of moving forward if I have any chance of surviving this. So I think for the opening was number one, learning to really listen to my body, not just hear what other people were telling me. And if it was sending me a signal, I needed to pay attention to it.
mm.
I had to let go of who I used to be and realize that person wasn't coming back. I also had to recognize that I had to operate within the limits of what my body could still do. And that mindset and focus on the positive versus the negative was what would help me figure out how to move forward and not be isolated and shut in my house on a high dose of opioids. So the one thing I could do was use my brain. And the thing that I couldn't do was sit and function in society as a normal, vertically oriented person.
But it's that using your brain, right? That mindset that really, sets that gives you that opening, right? It really is one of those things because you already operated and actually maybe needed that reminder to that's what got you to through all the things before, how it got you to Kilimanjaro, how it got you to the CEO, creating an innovative company. It wasn't just that, you got any company, it was innovative. It was the mindset really got you there, but the mindset then and not you didn't realize, right? We just pushed through because that was what they taught us. I mean, no matter what, go push yourself. I remember the various jobs that I was in, and I was like, don't worry, I'll just work harder. I know how to get through it. And had some great experiences both in corporate America and other places, but I just was like, don't worry, we'll find the way, right? We'll
Right.
figure it out. But that perfectionism isn't always, because it's so dangerous, especially for people who are high achievers. And how, how do you manage that as you're going through? So that it's a change of mindset. So going from a high performer to, somebody who's like, I got the tools. We weren't questioning your tools. We were questioning how do we reapply those tools?
Yeah, I think part of it took what I would call accepting a new normal, which was a
Mm,
very different way of living. And it was a term given to me or spoken to me by a therapist who actually helped me greatly during these years. And she kept floating this idea of a new normal. And I kept saying to her, I hate the new normal. I just hate it. I mean, I'm horizontal. My life is monochromatic. I'm not who I used to be. I don't know why I would want to embrace that. And she said, you got to stop fighting it. You just have to, you don't have to give up. You just have to give in enough to stop fighting yourself. And she was actually very wise because I realized that if I spent less energy on fighting my pain and fighting that person that I had become and spent more of that energy on figuring out like, what to do about it, that I'd be in a much better place. So I think that was one of the big keys that ultimately led me back into the world.
yeah, sure. Because the thinking of the past life or what could have been gets us all stuck in the what ifs or what could have gone on in the past, but we can't change the past. That's when I talk to people, work with people, I go, that's rear view energy. I don't want, rear view is nice. It's great pictures, and even when the pictures aren't nice, it's still in the past. It's the windshield and the going forward opportunities. What are some of the things that were important to you and skills that you had to either learn or relearn, because of your situation?
Well, I had to learn most certainly to let go of this image of myself both as a CEO, which I was not anymore, or as a chronic pain patient, which I did not want to be. But I had to let go of those things in order to accept a person that was not perfect. And for me, that version of imperfection was somebody with bodily limitations,
Mm.
and that had to be okay. So I know you know where this story's going, but I ultimately decided I wanted to use my brain and I wanted to keep learning. And I was passionate about women and girls, but passionate about their global needs. And I decided I would go back to grad school. And I wanted to get an international development degree that would let me lift up women and girls in ways that were even greater than getting their hands on computers. And I applied to grad school at a place at a university nearby where I lived in San Francisco. And I got in, and my first inclination was I'm going to defer because I'm going to wait until I can sit in a classroom because I can't do that. But then I realized I'm going to wait forever because I may never be able to sit for 2 to 3 hours in a seminar. So, trying to use some of those creative skills, I came up with the idea of going to grad school lying down because I could use my brain. I couldn't use my body in the way that society expected me to. And I brought an army cot that I set up in under a minute, along with an air mattress, and staged it in the middle of the room because that was where it could go. And I conducted myself like every other student in that class, but I just happened to do it lying down. That was traumatic.
Yeah, no,
It was
right. Being
pretty
doing anything
scary.
outside, yeah, doing anything outside of society's norms is really so you really took that embrace of what you wanted and how to you knew what you wanted, you knew how to go get it done, and how'd you shake that? Because that's sort of what started you some of the trip is that I wasn't good enough, and here you are. You're like, I knew I was good enough, and I just have to go. I can't wait for the perfect time, but I need to do it now.
I think sometimes you have to take that first step before you're ready. And I wasn't ready, but I did it anyway. And I still remember the first day in orientation, we were all introducing ourselves, and all these 20 somethings are seated at round tables. And I'm 50 for one, which is traumatic enough, but I'm lying down. And I remember hoisting myself up on my elbow to kind of prop my head up at a higher level, more like the level of the students sitting at the tables. And I said, hey, I'm Nancy, and I injured my back on Mount Kilimanjaro, and I'm going to be like you see me here today lying down in class, but I want you to know that I'm good with it so you can be too. And it was just, again, saying before I really felt it, we all collectively have to be cool with this because this is how I'm going to present myself to the world, and this is how I intend to re-enter. That was the first step.
Well, that's a huge first step. I mean, sometimes we have to take that chance, and it's not fake it till you make it. That's it really is like you, at least from what I'm hearing, is you felt like there was no other option, right? It's the burn the boats type of moment. This is what's going to happen because I know what I need to do for Nancy.
Absolutely. I think the next big aha moment came maybe 6 months later in the winter term of grad school. And I was in a class on peace and conflict, and the prof asked us to think about identity.
Mm.
And we were talking about the identity of female refugees, and he said, take 10 minutes and think about your own identity, and then we're going to come back and share. And mine was so clear. I thought to myself, I used to be a CEO, I used to be a wife, I used to be an athlete, I used to be all these things. And then now I'm a disabled chronic pain patient who is
Right.
trying to re-enter the world in a way society's not ready for. And I could not get that out of my mouth because of my cohort was interrupting me, saying,
Mm.
hey, we don't see you that way at all. You are a contributor, you have a lot to offer, you just happen to do it lying down. And I think in that moment, I realized like this thing that still limits me doesn't define me.
Well, that's part of the power, right? Is when you realize that the things that you might have experienced, or those are labels, and you could attach to them, or you can be something greater than that. It's still something that happened to you. It's still something that you're experiencing, but how do you put that to the positive twist and the using it as a stepping stone versus as another stone to bury it in?
Absolutely. If I hadn't gone to grad school, I wouldn't have re-entered the world, even tiptoeing in. And being able to complete that journey allowed me to begin traveling again, which I did by buying 3 seats in coach so
Mm.
I could lie down because I couldn't sit beyond perhaps a takeoff or a landing. And I fought the good fight against the people on the plane who would love to have that aisle seat I had my head in. And that allowed me to go back to work because I realized that just like grad school, I didn't have to do that sitting down all the time. And I was able to start to follow my passion for women and girls and their empowerment globally in a way that I never would have if I hadn't taken that first step.
Right. And I'd love to tell me more about that because I really, these are those episodes. So one of my Phoenix moments in life, I was going through a divorce and I was in a conference and it was a women's conference. I was working for a company. They were like, "Here, we have extra tickets. You want to come? You're always here in the morning." I went with all my friends, and Geraldine Ferraro spoke. Madeline Albright spoke. So it was a women's conference, and my girls were 3 and 1, and I was getting a divorce, and I was like, man, feeling really bad of the circumstances, and but I said to myself that I want my girls to be in rooms like that. And I want my girls to have the ability and man, have I gotten that. When we have girls, I wanted to make sure that I was the father that needed to be. And at times I was, and at times I could have improved. But when they speak back to me, I was like, man, I wanted to teach some girls to be self-empowered and to speak their mind, just not at me. But how do you, but how important is it to make sure that we have women who are able to speak up their mind and be equal in society?
Well, this is my personal opinion. I think it's very important. I think women and girls have so much to offer if they're given that chance or if they're given the opportunity to share what they think and who they are. I see that in a different way now than I did when it was about technology. I realize that girls and women have the right to a doctor when they need one. They have a right to an education. They have a right to economic independence and all the rest. So I think that our society is going to be well served by giving women a chance to live up to their potential.
Yeah, yeah, of course. But there are biases, right? Either conscious or unconscious, and whatever is comfortable with you. But how do we work through some of those unconscious bias? There's the conscious biases are almost easier to deal with, right? We can throw a little facts, but the unconscious biases, like I know how doctors treat pain and things like that become a completely different conversation.
Well, absolutely. That happened to me actually early on. I remember going to see my surgeon after my first operation, and I was 6 weeks in. I had 14 pieces of titanium in my body, and I was feeling like hell. And he walked in the door and he looked at me and he said, "Your fusion, your surgery was flawless. And I'm just so pleased with how your films look." And I said, "I'm miserable. My pain is 8 on a scale of 1 to 10." And his comment back to me was, "You seem really anxious. I think you need to see a psychiatrist." And the crazy thing about this is that studies show that in the medical arena, when women and men present with with the same symptoms, excuse me, that the men are offered pain relief medication and the women are most often offered mental health counseling and anti-anxiety meds. And it's a scary truth that I lived. Again, it was my anecdotal experience, but studies also show that it does happen. And that's just a frightening example of unconscious bias. He wasn't intending whatsoever to
Right.
change my care, but it can change the outcome of your healthcare plan.
Do you have any ideas? And then again, personal ideas of how because you're experiencing and the work that you do is helping globally the woman's voice. How do we make some of those changes, or some things that we can implement in our own lives?
I think for one, we need to invite girls and women to participate. We need to look for opportunities where their voices can be heard. I think we all need to listen a little harder.
Mm,
We need to show genuine empathy and compassion for men and women alike. We need to acknowledge if we have been behaving in ways that show an unconscious preference for one or the other. I mean, I think those are the kinds of things that can start to open up the table to allow girls and women a place that they deserve and a voice with people that are listening with different ears.
yeah, right. And we have to train people. I mean, to have those different ears, right? If you're not willing to listen, you'll be really good at not hearing anything that's being said. And that's one of the lessons I learn, still learning with my girls at times. What they need versus daddy wanting to solve things to do that. And so you've built lots of resilience by knowing within your body. So when prior to all that, you were an athlete. So athletes, we know to push through and keep pushing, but now you're listening to your body. And how does that feel with resilience to help you be even more resilient now because of all the things that you've gone through?
It helps me in so many ways. For one, it makes it okay if I'm not having a good day to not call it a failure because our bodies are up and down with all kinds of rhythms throughout a day and a week and a month. It lets me pay attention to the messages that I'm being given instead of constantly batting them away and ignoring them. I think it lets me feel more true to what I am able to do rather than what I only aspire to do. So
Mm.
it's more grounded in reality.
Okay, yeah, which is always the best way. One of the to always be present, to know what you're doing, and what tools do you use to continue your resilience?
Well, for one, in my work now, speaking and writing about resilience and about
Mhm.
identity and pain, I try very hard not to fall back on the old habits. I mean, it's
Mm.
tough when you're out there again in a somewhat public sphere to not let the old strategies creep back. I have to remember I'm human. I'm foibled, I have good days and bad, and that I need to do the very best that I can, but I need to pay attention to pain messages when I get them. I need to pay attention to my body and I need to respond and adapt accordingly so that I can live a better, truer life.
Yeah, recognizing those things. I know for myself, when I was going through things, I didn't realize where the stresses of my life would sit. Like my shoulders would bother me when I was dealing with all the stress, which is common for a lot of people. But I just was like, okay, that's just life. And now I know how to resolve those issues regularly, so I can kind of maintain that. I also didn't understand that if you maintain it, you don't have to have the big for me, Phoenix moments, or they don't become as deep as they had been.
I think I had to learn that pain wasn't the enemy because I thought that it was
Mm.
for so long. But it's information, and unfortunately, most of us are taught to ignore it. But if you pay attention to it, you can navigate your life, your body, your mind in a much more agile and adaptable way.
Yeah, no, for sure. And with all the healing and these doctors who gave you advice, it seems like sometimes that the person who gets injured gets blamed, right? For a situation. And why? do you have any idea or thoughts around on how that feels and how that doesn't help uh the mental wellness or the recovery?
That's such a good question. I think when doctors can't explain the pain and there's not an underlying reason for what you're experiencing, the problem can be directed back to you. I mean, I poured over 2,500 pages of medical records after 15 years of being in medical care. And I remember landing in the ER for the third time in about 6 months. And the admitting doctor wrote that, let me think of how he phrases, conversion disorder, factitious pain, and malingering must be considered. And I thought, I have no idea what those words even mean. What do they mean?
Mm,
So I looked them up, and it basically the layman's version means there's not a medical reason for your for your symptoms. You may be faking the pain to get attention, and you might even be drug seeking. So I think medicine's built around finding answers. It's really good at the acute fixes, but when there isn't that easy answer, everybody, including the doctors, get really uncomfortable. And, you know, one way to resolve it is by shifting the problem to the patient. And that's where it gets harmful if you're viewed differently because it can change the care that you receive.
right, and that's part of the conversations, and I know some medical schools. I've done some reading on, that they're looking at that, all these different because there's so many now that we have easier ways to sum up the data on so many different ways. We're seeing all these biases that are out there and how we can at least try. It's going to take a while because, you know, doctors as a whole think that they know all the answers. I've worked with people, doctors included, who it shakes them like how it shook you. You know, I'm a doctor. I was trained to have the answers, and when you don't, we deflect it.
I think respectfully, to their credit, I think pain is much better understood today than it was when I injured myself
Sure.
in 2001. And in fact, I don't even think pain was viewed as a disease in and of itself until like 2011. So I would hope that care can improve as understanding of disease and its function and how it manifests in people's symptoms gets smarter and better and more empathic.
Yeah, and as we start to get more better and well empathic, but taking care of our young women, tell us a little bit more about where you're at now, in that through the journey, uh, how you're feeling and things like that.
Well, the blessing today is that I'm actually well, quite well. And as I re-entered the world, I think the miracle that happened was my very deconditioned muscles slowly got stronger. And as I got stronger, setting up that cot or walking onto that plane, my pain began to recede. And then as I gained full function, the challenge was getting off the drugs.
Mm,
And which I did through a very careful 1 year step-by-step program under the care of
congratulations.
a very compassionate physician who stuck by me. And I was committed because I had felt so isolated and marginalized that I would just spend my time and my energy, A, sharing the story with other people, because I think there are a lot of people out there who are struggling who may learn something from the conversation that you and I are having, for example. And I committed myself, I doubled down, if you will, on trying to do anything I could to allow women and girls to live a better life.
Yeah, and so how is the work that you're doing now? How are you impacting and continuing to impact and growing that impact?
Well, I will always be involved with organizations that lift up women and girls. I don't run one myself, but I'm very involved in the community in girl and women empowerment organizations that do global work. So that's always what I focus on is to look for the organizations you can support that are doing an excellent job on the ground of lifting up girls and women. So that I do. And then my own writing and speaking, I would say that if I can use the word feminist, I believe very much in the opportunities for girls and women. And if I can be one example of that, of how a woman came back and found a new way forward and can share that with other people so they can too learn how to put their heads down and get through a struggle, then that's what I want to do.
Yeah, no, well, that's beautiful because that's really what it is. It's and that goes back to that leadership that with the first question I asked you is because leadership is also the impact you have when you walk out of the room, not just when you're in the room.
Absolutely.
So I usually have at towards the end of the episode a section where I have you walk into a magic garden, and you've given us a lot of advice, and in this magic garden, if we can have one piece of advice that you would love to give to everybody, that might grow right away. You might say it, and it shakes, or sometimes it has to be nurtured, which a lot of advice does need to get nurtured. You have to dig down a little deeper. What piece of advice might you have that you want to share with us today?
I think that separating yourself from the roles that you play professionally can be a really healthy activity in learning how to step into whatever your best self is.
Mm.
I think that meant for me stepping out of the role of CEO, stepping out of being a chronic pain patient and figuring out how to rebuild an identity when those things are left behind. And so, what I would say to somebody is put your head down, figure out what's true, stay aligned with your body and your mind, figure out what you can do. Focus on the good things.
Yep. Yeah. When you can remove those masks or the blankets, that hold us down, that becomes so empowering. How can everybody find you?
Uh, the best places to find me are on Substack. I write a publication called Life Inside Pain. That's for anybody whose life no longer responds to effort the way it used to, like me. And that's at Nancy Deyo. It's deyo.substack.com, or on any of the social media channels, or on my own website, which just launched at nancydeyo.com. They can write to me there, and I would welcome that.
Okay, well, that's great. Well, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. You've given us so much to think about, and I know there's so much more. I mean, the addiction part and things like that. But I want to say, as somebody who's worked in the addiction space, thank you for being a warrior. To keep pushing out your message, and you really are, one of those bright lights that I really enjoy meeting.
Well, thank you, Dave. It's a pleasure, and I'm grateful for what you're doing for your community.
Okay, well, thank you. And everybody else, as always, we want to make sure that you have peace and light, love in light in in your life as your foundation. And then when you're bringing it back, bring some awesome thoughts, be authentic, and have a great day and hit your sweet spot.